I'm Alison Scott-Bowman. I'm a professor in the law department here. Our chair this evening is Dr. Deepa Govindarajan Driver. She's a trade unionist and academic. She served as the legal observer in the Julian Assange case on behalf of the United European Left in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, the Haldane Society, and the ELDH. What does ELDH stand for?
It's a funny acronym. European Lawyers for Democracy and World Human Rights. So you only get some of the letters.
Okay. Thank you very much. And in fact, Nina has worked strenuously with Deepa to bring the Assange case to SOAS and make sure that people were aware of the injustices. So that's a brilliant victory that he is now free. Deepa teaches state and corporate accountability, ethics and financial regulation at the University of Reading. She serves on the National Executive of the University and College Union and is chair of negotiators on the union side for the USS pension scheme. So I'm going to hand over to Deepa to introduce this amazing panel that's come here this evening for you.
I'm so grateful to all of you for being here and to Nina for inviting me. Sanjana, Nina and Alison have been very welcoming of some of the most critical topics we don't really talk about. We've been witnessing a year of live-streamed genocide. And in that year, the level of propaganda and empty communication in the media and what passes for journalism is unreal. It's surreal not to be able to stop this. And I think it makes a lot of us feel very powerless and very unable to, even when we recognize that something is right, to do anything because of the way in which the political structures, both in this country and in other powerful countries, work. The reality is that the elites of the world have brought us to a point where we are on the brink of nuclear states engaging with each other at any moment, something that, after the Second World War, we really saw a movement to some extent for peace. And peace is now considered a bad word. Environmentalists are not bothered when you have the largest explosion of the Nord Stream pipeline and the environmental disaster there. And we are all willing to turn a blind eye to or ignore the kind of destruction that is happening around us in real time, whether it is of our universities, whether it is of our institutions. And instead, we are being gaslit into having conversations about things that don't really matter. So I'm really, really happy to be here with three people who have experience of trying to engage with the system in a way in which it is, where their work has made a difference. And up to the right, to the far right, sorry. Not yet. Is somebody whose work many of you will no doubt have come across already. Matt Kennard is the head of investigations at Declassified UK. He was a fellow and then a director of the Centre for Investigative Journalism. He is the author of the books Irregular Army and Silent Coup, both of which are really interesting to read. Matt's done phenomenal amounts of work uncovering some of the most corrupt and disgusting practices, including work he's doing right now in relation to the use of the British Army base in Akrotiri to further the genocide and to bomb Yemen. And so it's really cutting-edge work. The work that Declassified does uncovers some of the most disturbing parts of the way the national security architecture works within this country. And it is one of the few organizations that actually confronts that, because there are very few journalistic organizations that are not complicit in the work that is going on. So Matt, real pleasure to have you here. To my right, and again somebody from the left, is a political activist and a founding member and convener of the Stop the War Coalition. You will, even if you are not from the UK, you will recognize that the big Palestine demos that have been going on, the fantastic work that has been done to press for peace in relation to Ukraine, the work over the years, of course, on Iraq and subsequently the support for Julian Assange, all of that has been led by the Stop the War Coalition, allowing us to have a debate that actually engages with the idea that peace might be a solution, that we don't have to bomb people into peace. And so it's a pleasure to have Lindsey here. Lindsey is, of course, also an author who's written several books, including 2 on women's rights and on a people's history of London. And to my left is a political organiser and writer who's currently serving as the communications director for Progressive International. Those of you who may have watched Belmarsh Live, which was streamed from the UK with, and elsewhere in the US, etc., with a huge number of very impressive panelists, should know that it was James who was behind all of that, besides being one of the driving forces in Jeremy Corbyn's campaign and work. Matt co-founded the left-wing grassroots movement Momentum and was public relations advisor to the former Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who is, of course, the best prime minister we have never had. So, Matt, Lindsey and James, thank you very much for being here. I'm looking forward to hearing you speak, and we will make enough time for you to ask questions. So the speakers will speak for about 15 minutes each. And I will try and gently stop them if they go over. But I'm sure those 15 minutes aren't really enough to capture some of the range of questions you might have, so we'll try and take as many questions from the audience as possible. If you can, please switch off your mobile phones or turn them on silent so we don't have them ringing. But yeah, may I start then, please, with Lindsey, who's going to give us a few thoughts on protest movements. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deepa, and thanks to Nina and to Alison for organising this discussion tonight. I think it's an incredibly important thing to be discussing because we're told all the time that there are great divisions in the world between democracy and dictatorship. We're told that Britain is the oldest democracy in the world and therefore probably the best, or certainly that's the view of some of the British establishment. And we're told that we are able to do anything we want under this democracy. But of course we know that that isn't true, and we know that far from it being the case that I'm talking tonight about protest in particular, but far from it being the case that we're able to protest in the way that we want, when we want, perfectly legally being able to do so, actually the more you find that protest raises issues which are against the government or against the monarchy or against the people who run this country, against the big corporations and oil giants and all the other companies, the less you're able to see it as something which governments want. And in fact, we've had, instead of that, we've had a series of repressive measures over the years which make protest more difficult. And these have been accelerated in recent years, but they're something that have a very long history. And I want to start firstly with a little bit about what is happening today, where we have, on Saturday, we're going to have the 20th national demonstration in support of the Palestinians and also in support of the Lebanese people who are, as we meet here tonight, being bombed and invaded by Israel, and this is completely approved by our government. Now, if you were up early this morning and listened to the Today programme, which doesn't do anything for your blood pressure or your health, but I keep doing it for some inexplicable reason, you will have heard Zara Sultana, who is a young, she was a Labour MP, elected as a Labour MP. She lost the whip from Labour straight away because she voted against the two-child, the cap on two-child benefit. So she's sitting as an MP, as an independent MP, and she got up, she got on the radio this morning, very unusually that you hear a voice like hers, and she said, the majority of people in this country want a ceasefire. The majority of people in this country want to stop arming Israel. The majority of people in this country do not want the aggressive behaviour by Israel that we're seeing at the moment. You would never get this. I'm not going to talk much about the media because Matt's going to talk about that, but you would never get any sense of this from the media, nor would you get any sense of it from the way in which the demonstrations are treated, because from the very beginning they have been treated as illegitimate, hate marches, violent, setting out to upset one section of the community, the Jewish community. We're told this daily about the marches. We were also told we're not allowed to chant certain slogans, from the river to the sea. They tried to make an illegal slogan a year ago. We were told at the very beginning we couldn't even wave Palestinian flags because that might be illegal. Now, we do actually wave Palestinian flags and now Lebanese flags on every demonstration. We do chant from the river to the sea on every demonstration, but it gives you some idea that the whole notion of freedom to protest is extremely curtailed by what the government wants people to do and to hear. And in a way, the bigger the protest, the more they feel threatened by it and the more they want to stop it. Now, in a way, protest has always been seen as a huge threat to the establishment. And I was looking a little bit today at some of the history because, again, we're told that Britain has this really good democracy and it works very, very well. Actually, it took people hundreds of years to get the vote in this country. It took women longer than men. Some men had the vote, and some women got the vote in 1918, which is only just over 100 years ago. But actually, if you look at the movements from the time of Peterloo, when they cut down protesters, the yeomanry cut down protesters and killed loads of them on the demonstration in Manchester, that was about reform and people being able to get democratic expression, and it was completely denied. After that, there were a series of laws passed which made it completely illegal even to do what we're doing tonight. You couldn't even have a meeting which discussed church or state with over 50 people at it without getting the prior permission of a magistrate. If you dared to try and join the trade union, you were likely, as were the Tolpuddle martyrs, to be deported to Australia, which was a pretty big deal, obviously, at the time. So there was a whole history of people wanting to protest, trying to protest for essentially democratic rights and very, very much connected with the vote. And you look at that whole history of the vote, right the way through with the reform movement, with the Chartists. Later in the 1860s, Karl Marx was involved in protests in London where they tore down the railings of Hyde Park because the gates of Hyde Park were locked to try and stop big protest demonstrations arriving. And of course, we had the suffragette movement, which had to resort to all sorts of direct action tactics in order to begin to get the vote for women. So this is not something which is a gradual process which has been agreed by our rulers. It's something which people have had to fight for all the time. And if you look, the establishment of rights in this country have nearly always been connected with protest. It's very, very rarely that you find some sort of benevolent MP who goes into Parliament and decides that they're going to make life better for everybody. It's nearly always that you find people demonstrate and they protest and sometimes face very, very severe repression for doing so. And it's only after those events that you find that Parliament itself begins to ratify them. So I think that's an important thing to understand as well. If you look at, again, the question of trade unions, again, trade unions have existed in this country for about 200 years. Under Margaret Thatcher, which started about 40 years ago, a whole number of laws have been passed which makes it, each one was designed to make it harder and harder to have any trade union democracy. So if you want to go on strike, You have, I mean, Deepa will explain this no doubt in great detail, but if you want to go on strike, you have to ballot. You're not allowed to ballot online. You have to post it, so loads of people forget and leave it too late. You then have to get a 50% majority. You then have to give 2 weeks' notice. It goes on and on and on. And if you're not completely exhausted by that process, you're allowed to go out and strike, but only under the very limited conditions of the ballot. Now, this is a restriction on people's rights. Having picket lines of 6 people is restriction on people's rights. And all the time, these are now justified as laws when actually they're laws which are deliberately designed to make protest harder. And I think if you look at the modern laws on attacks on protest, every one of them, and we've seen a number of them in recent years, are designed to make effective protest illegal. And so if you look at, we have now very, very long sentences for a whole number of people. I don't know if people have seen the Just Stop Oil people who threw paint and didn't do any damage to Van Gogh's sunflowers, but of course the whole idea that you might destroy a painting, not because it's a beautiful painting, but because it's worth millions and millions of pounds, which is what they're actually concerned with, led to these people being put in prison for 2 years. People who've blocked motorways have been put in prison because they've caused disruption to, of course, that's what demonstrations are meant to do. They are actually meant to demonstrate that you are attempting to disrupt the status quo in a particular way. Now, whether you agree with all these demonstrations, whether you agree with the tactics, whether you agree with all those things, is really a secondary question. Do people have the right to do these things without being seen as criminals and without receiving sometimes very, very heavy punishments for doing so? And what happens with the protests over Palestine is we have a remarkable thing now, which is under the Public Order Act. The police can pass, they can make these regulations under what's called Section 12 of the Public Order Act and Section 14 of the Public Order Act. And what these essentially do is prescribe where you can go, when you can go on it, and don't hang around at the end because you're going to get arrested. Now, we had a protest, 10 days ago about the attacks on Lebanon. The police put in a Section 14 order. It says you must leave the demonstration by 8 o'clock in the evening. It started at 6. You must leave by 8 o'clock. So the people who didn't leave at 8 o'clock, the people who maybe were still shouting into megaphones for another 15 minutes, or the people who were just hanging around with their friends, or people who just don't want to go and leave a demonstration when somebody tells them to, these were people who got arrested for breach of Section 14 of the Public Order Act. And see what they do here. What they do, because they put the time limit on it, then you become a criminal for doing something which previously would not have been regarded as a crime, for hanging around at the end of a demonstration. Time and time again, we've had this on the Section 12s. They prescribe the route, and you're not allowed or you're not supposed to depart from the route. And we had one where one of the demonstrations which went round the edge of Hyde Park, and people quite understandably get fed up with waiting, go into the park itself, cut through, have a shortcut, they get arrested for breaching the Section 12 orders. Now, these are the kind of arrests that you get. We also get arrests for people who have placards or slogans that the police don't like. Now, I find it quite incredible, really, that the Metropolitan Police, which has been found to be institutionally racist, institutionally homophobic, institutionally sexist, is somehow the arbiter on about what you can or can't put on a particular placard. So we had a woman who was prosecuted. She was extremely heavily pregnant by the time she got to court. She was prosecuted because she had a placard which said, Sunak and Braverman, who are both Asian, are coconuts, which some people regard as an insult to black people who are regarded as not representing the best interests of black people. Again, whatever you think of the slogan, the idea that this woman is dragged through the courts, has months and months of this, and of course is acquitted, because any sensible jury will acquit a person in this kind of situation, it really does beg a belief that this sort of thing can happen. But this is happening on a daily basis, and people are being sometimes charged with quite serious things like supporting terrorism because they've made a reference to Hamas. And this on Saturday, I can guarantee if anybody has anything to do with Hezbollah, they will be arrested if the police see them and do so. It seems to me these are quite serious attacks on the right to protest, on the right to do things. A couple of other points I just wanted to make about this is the violence of the police in these occasions. The kettling of people, I don't know if people know what kettling means, but you know, when a demonstration is surrounded by police and not allowed to move. This has become increasingly the case in the last quarter of the century. And what they do is they surround people for hours. You have no food, you have no water, you can't go to the toilet, you can't go anywhere else, your phone runs out of battery, you may be a young kid whose parents don't know where you are. This is effectively temporary imprisonment for daring to demonstrate. That's what it is. But this is regarded as completely acceptable, and they do it time and time and time again. So it seems to me when we talk about democracy, one of the central features of democracy is A, to make it clear that we don't really live under a democracy, that we don't live under a democracy which is really accountable, which is, and certainly if you were just electing somebody once every 5 years, we've got 5 more years of Keir Starmer, nobody can get rid of him by that kind of means. So if people have got anything they want to protest about, then they have to do it in some direct way. They have to protest on the streets, they have to sit down, they have to do any of the things that people do on the demonstrations. What successive governments are doing is trying to make it harder and harder for people to do that, and trying to turn protesters who are speaking up against what is wrong with the world to try to make them look like they're the criminals and they're the people who are responsible. So the oil companies get off scot-free, the polluters get off scot-free. Nobody takes them to prison. Nobody takes the people who are responsible for Grenfell to prison. None of these people ever get anywhere near being prosecuted. It's the people who protest about all these things who end up doing it. So I think part of being in a democratic society is not just having the right to protest, it is to protest. I think if we want to defend our rights, and these are rights that people have fought for hundreds of years. If you look about why we have lots of parks and public spaces in London, it's because people protested about developers in the 19th century trying to build houses on top of them. If you look at the way in which the limited trade union rights we have are there, it's because of what people like the Tolpardle Martyrs did. If you look at all of these things, it is because of protest. And we have to keep protesting, defend the right to protest, but also accelerate the level at which we protest. I would like to see far more protests over far more topics, because there's simply, you know, if I wanted to sit down and draw a list of things that I'd like to protest about, you might say that's just my particular character. But there are a great many things that really do need to be protested at. We live in a world of environmental danger. We live in a very, very serious threat of war, and of nuclear war as well, as Deepa has pointed out. And I think it's not just in our interests, it actually is our duty if we want to have a world for our children and grandchildren, which is a world worth living in, then protest has to be absolutely at the centre of any democratic society.
Thanks, Lindsey. That was very educative as usual, but I must complain that you didn't mention the unwritten rule of striking for trade unions, which is that it has to be cold, it has to be wet, it has to be miserable, and that's when you have a good strike. We've talked a little bit about the imprisonment of dissenters, and I just wanted to point out that Palestine Action's Richard Barnard is in court on Friday, for those of you who are interested in following that case, because they're, of course, taking direct action, and whatever your views might be about direct action, it might be interesting as students to understand what's going on in that case. We also have, I've just come back from Strasbourg last night at midnight, because I came back from Julian Assange being declared a political prisoner after years of 14 years imprisoned in one way or another, smeared, hounded, and nearly driven to death. And a lot of this has been because, as Lindsey said, our freedom of association, our freedom of expression have been curtailed. And quite a lot of the time, the issue is one of self-censorship in order to, as much as it is about overt censorship through the state. And one of the people who really knows how to break through these barriers of censorship is Matt Kennard. And I'm really hoping that you will tell us a little bit about how the media has been captured and what's going on in the world of media. Thank you, Matt.
Can I sit down? Yeah. Firstly, thanks a lot for inviting us. It's a very important forum because, as people know, institutions these days don't take risks usually. So to invite us for, I'm always a bit surprised when I get an invite from a proper place. But and also the panelists. These are three people that I think have changed Britain, to be honest with you. So Lindsey was someone when I was coming up, when I was young, who was leading the anti-war movement, all movements for all different types of progressive causes. Deepa, who I got to know through the Julian Assange case, and worked behind the scenes without any kind of public acknowledgement, really. But I think changed the case. And then James, who I know from, we all know the story of Jeremy Corbyn, but I mean, obviously that didn't end the way we wanted it to, but I think has changed Britain forever. And James was a key figure in that whole movement, which continues, obviously. But today, I was asked to speak about democracy and media, and I was just on the tube on the way up, and I was just thinking about how to approach that. Obviously, I've done more preparation than that, but that was the sort of final stage. But I mean, as a headline, I was just thinking, well, we don't have either of them. We don't live in a democracy. We live in an oligarchy with limited freedoms, and we don't have a media system. We have a propaganda system, and that's two realizations that I've come to over many years, but have really sort of solidified since we started Declassified UK, because when you're trying to do journalism which actually exposes power, which we're told in journalism school is what you're meant to do, you realize actually the whole system's set up for you not to do that. And I'll concentrate on the media. I'll just quickly complete the oligarchy point, but I think that that really solidified for me when we saw what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, because systems, when they're operating as they should, they don't really reveal themselves, and they only really reveal themselves when they stop working as they should. And obviously the system, the oligarchical system, stopped working as it should when Jeremy Corbyn was elected Labour Party leader. And you saw all the different pressure points in our so-called democracy. You saw the fact that the Labour Party, which we're told is meant to be different to the Tory party and is meant to be a part of an adversarial political system where two sides duke it out with different ideas, you saw the Labour Party actually that's not its role. Its role is to absorb and destroy the left, because Jeremy Corbyn was destroyed by many different elements of the British establishment, but primarily it was the Labour Party itself that destroyed him. He got within 2,000 votes spread across a few constituencies of winning a majority in the 2017 election. Now, if he hadn't been fighting a guerrilla war against his own party was fighting against him for 2 years, if they'd been behind him, he would have won that election. We wouldn't have had the horror of the Tories for the last 7 years. But they did, and that exposed what the Labour Party's role in our society is. And then, just to move on to the media, I think it's worth just to start with an example from the last couple of days. Deepa mentioned Strasbourg, which was a very important moment. Yesterday was the vote. Yesterday, the Council of Europe Assembly voted that Julian Assange was a political prisoner in Britain for the 5 years he was held in Belmarsh, maximum security prison. And I don't know if that includes also, that was referencing the time he spent in the embassy, but anyway, he also spent many years in the embassy as well, which the UN had ruled was an arbitrary detention by the UK because they didn't allow him to take up his safe passage to Ecuador. Now, firstly, that's really revealing, isn't it, that European parliamentarians would rule that Britain had a political prisoner here, a journalist who exposed US and UK war crimes for 5 years, But what's more revealing for me is I sent a tweet out when that passed. I said, okay, well, this is all the evidence you need. This is official evidence that we held a journalist as a political prisoner for 5 years. And then I said, not one UK newspaper will report this. And I was why did I send that? Because you would think, okay, well, you might get shown up a bit here because it might be that The Guardian publishes an article later tonight. I was aware of that, but I was going to delete it if that happened. But I was so sure, and sure enough, no newspaper has written a single word about that vote by the Council of Europe, which is a very, very important body in the region. That's amazing, but it is symptomatic of our media system, and it's symptomatic of the fact that we don't have a media system, we have a propaganda system, and the main way that they enforce the state narrative or the corporate narrative is through propaganda by omission. So it's not by outright lying, although they do that. The main way they do it is to basically leave out all the information you need to have a real understanding of how your society works and how the world works. Because no one will know now who consumes UK news that the Council of Europe has voted that Julian Assange was a political prisoner here. If we lived in a democratic society with a democratic media which actually did its job, that would have been on the front page of every single paper. And obviously, like, no one would dispute that. It's a huge, huge finding. But it's not, and that goes across the board, you know, and there's another, and I've seen that with Declassified, you know. We've done a lot of work in the last year about UK role in Gaza, in the Gaza genocide. And before Gaza, we did all the work about the British role in Yemen, which was, at the time, this was a war that started in 2015, and the Saudis were just destroying Yemen through a brutal air campaign, but also a man-made famine, which they enforced by a siege of Yemen. All their ports were closed. But the British were heavily involved, maybe even more involved than the US, and we were doing all the work. None of the stories we did about Yemen got into a single newspaper, and we were revealing really important information about our role. None of the stories I've been doing about the Cyprus base, which was mentioned, and other elements of the support for the Israelis as they commit genocide in Gaza has ever got into the mainstream media. So that shows you that's how they brainwash the population. The primary mechanism. The other one is through a technique called distraction, where they problematize and promote stories which don't explain how the system works, but merely are sort of surface stories that titillate the population, you know, like the recent ones about Starmer's expenses. Okay, might be a story, but is it not a bigger story that he is complicit in a genocide, which is killing tens of thousands of kids? And that's another brainwashing technique, you know, because people think they're getting the news. They think they have an adversarial media as well. That's the other thing with those stories. They're like, oh, well, The Guardian is right, or The Times is writing a story which shows Keir Starmer is taken all these freebies. But so that they're like, okay, well then the media is holding a power to account, but they don't hold systematic power to account. They don't hold them to account for the real crimes, which are killing tens of thousands of kids, and in Yemen's case, pushing 2.3 million kids to the brink of starvation. It was actually interesting because the Yemen crime was done under the Conservative government, and I remember when they had that leadership election, and there were 5 of them, and I didn't expect a question about Yemen, but it was a preposterous idea. It would have had to have been a different universe to even have a journalist ask one of those people, 2 of them who had been foreign minister and defense minister during this criminal attack on Yemen. The idea that they'd even be asked a question about it was preposterous. Now, again, that's a sign that we don't have a media. We do not have a media system. We have a propaganda system, and we have propagandists and stenographers. So. And this, again, as I said, this operates with, nicely and can give the illusion of a media and an adversarial media until someone comes along and starts doing work which actually challenges power, and then you see the reaction of that propaganda system. So Julian Assange is a very good case. Now, he started releasing the US cables in 2010, and then did subsequent releases, he revealed more about the inner workings of the most powerful empire in history than any journalist has ever done in history. You would think that he would be celebrated by our journalists and by people who were interested in truth, because he risked a lot. The opposite. The Guardian, particularly, and other newspapers went for him and tried to destroy him, and actually became the vehicles through which the information war was fought by the CIA, the UK state, and other different forces. That's very, very telling. And in fact, one of the moments when I kind of had an awakening about how the media works was when I was stationed in Washington, DC with the Financial Times, when I was a reporter there when I was much younger. And when that was around the time of the cable releases, and I was really excited by this and enthused by the fact that, okay, well, we've got access to all this information which can tell us how our society really works. We had editorial meetings in the Washington bureau office, and all of the journalists were just denigrating Assange, weren't interested in what he'd revealed, weren't interested in his safety. They were all just trying to poo-poo him as an individual and his quest to expose power. That is what operates across the board, and it's very, very important for people to understand that all the stuff we're taught when we're young about the society we live in is false, and we only understand it's false if we push the barriers that we don't even know are there. You know, there's that famous Rosa Luxemburg quote: "Those who don't move don't notice their chains." So if you talk to journalists in mainstream media, they all say, well, I can write what I want. I can cover what I want. I don't have anyone telling me what to write. But the point is that they can write what they want because their proprietors like what they write. And if you write something different, you'll be out the door, which is what happened to me at the Financial Times. So it's an illusion, and it's very, very important that we do not, I believe, we do not hold any truck with the mainstream media. We don't need to reform it. It's unreformable because it's an arm of the state, effectively. What we need to do is build up a parallel system of alternative media, which does proper journalism, rigorous journalism, evidence-based journalism, but is not putting out information which is tainted by corporate or state power. And that's happening in this country. It's quite an exciting time. I mean, there's a lot to be pessimistic about on this topic of democracy because we're seeing all the repression. But actually, of all the countries in the West, I think the UK has got one of the most exciting alternative media ecosystems, which has come up a lot. Really grew during the Jeremy Corbyn period, but has really blossomed really, and it's not strong enough to take on the mainstream media yet. But this is a long-term project that will be decades in the making, and I think that it's vitally important we do it because another thing is Corbyn's a very important case for anyone studying British society and how it works. And one of the reasons it was so easy for the establishment to destroy him was he didn't have any infrastructure around him to support him. He was kind of a lone figure. The media, there was no media. When smears would come out against him, there were sort of alternative outlets, mainly the Canary and Squawk Box, like small organizations, but that's why they were able to destroy him, because there was not an infrastructure to fight back in his cause or to tell the truth. And we need to create that ecosystem, and it's vital. And obviously there's obstacles to that because the powers that be know that it's a problem if they have an alternative media that can actually disseminate truthful information outside of the mainstream. They don't like that, so they do resort to different ways to try and destroy that, like smearing, which happened to the Canary a lot, tried to defund them and stuff. But I don't think they'll succeed. And that's also why you see the attack on social media and stuff, and censorship, because democracy, the powers that be in this country and elsewhere, they hate nothing more than democracy, because it's a real problem for their ability to project power in secret. And this is what we've seen a lot with the Gaza stories we've been doing, you know. All of them, we've had to prize information out of the British government, and we've got it in the end, but they're protected by the fact that no mainstream journalists are doing it. So even if the stories that we've been doing about Cyprus, which of course are a really big problem for the British in Cyprus, the president of Cyprus had to make a comment on it. The president of Northern Cyprus had to make a comment on it, basically saying we're not involved in Gaza. And there's been demonstrations. There was one on Sunday, actually, at RAF Akrotiri. There's been a lot back in December and January. There was one in Limassol, the second city, which is next door to RAF Akrotiri. Now, this is declassified. There's three of us. Basically, one full-time reporter. Can you imagine if the resources of the BBC or the Guardian were put towards actually exposing power? The whole system would change within a couple of months, because people would put pressure on the government because they'd be aware of what the government was doing. And that's why the media system is allowed to operate, and that's why they extol the virtues of the free press, because they know the free press is not really going to ever be a check on their power. And as soon as it is, they have to resort to repression. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, really. We're facing, I think, as a society, we're facing a real turn towards repression, and that's really become clear during the Gaza genocide, because, as Lindsey mentioned, you know, even the prescription of Hamas and Hezbollah, which didn't happen recently. Hezbollah was in 2019, actually at the behest of the Israel lobby, and Hamas was a bit earlier. But that's a major attack on free speech. You don't have to support Hamas to know that you should be allowed to speak about different organizations in the world any way you want. That's a central tenet of a free society. You know, it's like the US during the Vietnam War saying you can't support the Viet Cong, or it's just unheard of. So, but it's a way of dampening down on democracy and dampening down on dissent, and they're losing, and they're at odds with their population. This is a contradiction that is going to play out, and I'll finish with this because I know I haven't got a watch, but I'm probably rattling on. There is a massive breach now between the ruling class and the population on what they think, and the ruling class is not going to change to get in line with the population. The ruling class is actually turning towards repression to make sure they can discipline the population. That's especially clear with Gaza. You know, like with a vast majority of the population wants a ceasefire, wants to stop arms to Israel, and actually there was a poll recently that the minus 71 is Israel has a favorable rating of Israel, like the lowest it's ever been. And this is while our government is ramping up its support for Israel, and that can't stand for long. That can't stand for long unless they put people in prison, or unless they put deterrents in place to stop people speaking out, which they are. But it won't work because, not to sound corny, but the power of the people is too powerful. They can't put us all in prison. Well, they might be able to, but not yet. But you see every single day creeping repression to try and deal with that breach between the ruling class and the people.
Matt, can I get you to?
Okay, and we have to make sure that we don't back down. Basically, that's the final message. Double down, because at Declassified, look, we do stories that people say, oh, you must get so much shit from the government or whatever, but we're still here and we're still doing it. And Julian Assange, they wanted him to stop. They wanted to put him in Belmarsh so it would stop anyone doing proper journalism. It didn't. So let's all double down and do some more.
Yeah, it was a very good moment to see 46 countries around the world representing, millions of people agreeing that he was a political prisoner. And it's really interesting. I'm following a case right now in the UK, which is a freedom of information case. And, freedom of information is one of the basic kind of protections we have. And it's taking an Italian journalist to run a freedom of information case related to Keir Starmer's destruction, or his CPS's destruction, rather, of records which show things like, we've got information which says the British are writing to the Swedes saying, don't you dare get cold feet, this is not being treated like any other extradition. And, there's attempts to assassinate a journalist in an embassy. All these kinds of things, and we're getting more information about that. But no British journalist is working on it. It's taking an Italian journalist to do the work. So while I agree with Matt that the ecosystem of journalism is certainly thriving, independent journalism, but more than anything else, I think there is a need for courage. And one of the things that, when you talk to people and you say, whom are you going to vote for? We just had general elections. Lots of people say, oh, they're all much of a muchness, aren't they? What difference does it make? Whom should I vote for? What do I care? And that's what I grew up with when I grew up in India, because you think all the politicians are corrupt. What is the point? And to address that, there is a need for a certain politics of hope. And we certainly wouldn't have expected that in the UK at the time after Tony Blair, right? And Jeremy Corbyn's been around a long time, but it took a group of people who had hope, who had courage, who had a vision to do something. And James Schneider, who's about to speak next, I'd be very interested to hear, James, how we got 13, 14 million people to mobilize and vote for Jeremy Corbyn. 13 million people in this country who still live in this country, many of them, can be mobilized, and maybe more. I'd also be very keen to hear about things like, the typical left problem, which is one of infighting and little small groups all trying to... How did you bring people together? How do you deal with things like self-censorship and virtue signaling and the kind of defensiveness that comes from being really small and moving into something big and magnificent like you managed to build? Please, James.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for being here. It's really nice for me to be in this room. I used to come here sometimes about 15 years ago to, don't report me, to steal education, and would sneak in and pretend I was a student and sort of sit at the back. So it's nice to, hopefully that's what some people here are doing. Again, you won't be reported.
Not with those barriers at the gates, we won't.
So, yeah, as you've heard put extremely clearly and eloquently, we don't live in a democracy, and that's very much my experience. We have from managing the media for Jeremy Corbyn when he was leader of the Labour Party for about 4 years, the analysis we've heard is completely right. We do live in an oligarchy and a propaganda system. But I don't find this miserable, even though it's bleak and unpleasant, because how could we live in a democracy? A democracy is not a system of government where you have elections every few years and you have a parliament. Democracy is people being in charge of their own lives individually and collectively. And that's the sort of, it's an ideal, it's the perfect, it's like a state that you can't quite reach, asymptotically, is that the right word? Anyway. So rather than democracy, there's the process of democratization and the process of domination. And these jostle with each other always, at all times. You can look through the historical process and you can see those things at play. And we can see them at play today. And we can see it at play over history, and how, because we live in a world system, when we talk about democracy, we're encouraged to think about Britain and what's happening here and the systems of our political apparatus. But the self-rule of people and communities here is intrinsically linked to the self-rule of people and communities all over the world, because, these chairs that we're sitting on, not every piece of them comes from here. They're part of a global, even the most mundane things. We live in a global system. So I want to just take a step back and look at what's happened over the last 50 years or so, to then see where we are in this great struggle between democratization and domination. Because 50 years ago, we were living at a turning point, in some ways a high point of a long period of struggle of democratization in Britain and around the world. In the UK, we hear a lot that the 70s were bad, but you actually go and look at obviously, okay, I wasn't around then, but if you go and look at a whole host of things, like there were 13 million people were in trade unions. Over a third of the population lived in social housing. There was rent controls. Loads of industries were in public ownership. If you look at culture, like what plays were on, who was writing them, who was TV, it's like way less elitist, many more working class voices and so on and so forth than we have in public life now. And around the world, around 50 years ago, after political decolonization, fully incomplete, the nations of what was then called the Third World, would now maybe called the Global South, but the nations of the Third World saw that they still lived under colonialism, even though they were formally free, and that the world system was still one that was structurally colonial in its trade relations, in the management of resources, in science and technology, in food, in agriculture, and so on and so forth. And they led a charge to democratize the whole world system so that it would be more democratic for everybody that lived in it. And it reached its peak exactly 50 years ago with the United Nations declaring the new international economic order, which is a fantastic document which everybody should read. It lays out extremely well a whole number of reforms, not perfect reforms, but reforms that would increase the sovereignty of the peoples of the Third World, of the global majority, so we would have a more democratic world from the level of security through to economy, through to what people eat. And they used the UN, an imperfect set of structures that was not set up in any way to be democratic in terms of the populations, to have the global majority in the leading role. And they used its limited institutions and the General Assembly to pass through some important things, not just the new international economic order, but changes to international law which are extremely relevant, for example, today. For example, the right of colonized and oppressed people to struggle for self-determination and liberation, including through force of arms, which is part of international law because it was fought for and won in this great period of democratization. And then what's happened, linked, they're very, very linked, in Britain, in the global north, and in the south over the last 50 years, has been the pendulum towards domination. And that was really hard fought. It's not a natural process. It's not that the attempts at democratization just sort of didn't work and kind of fell apart. And so instead we had to give as much wealth and power as possible to the people that already had it, and we had to entrench and make more violent the inequalities and the domination that the majority of people experience around the world. And that's this is the background to this moment where we all find ourselves in. We are living in what happens after 50 years of the pendulum swinging towards domination, to space being closed down, space of course, for protest, for organizing within the media, within the economy, within global forums, and that's where we are now. But we look around ourselves, both here in Britain and around the world, and you can see that, yes, okay, they are dominating. The people that rule the world, the handful of corporations, the billionaires, the generals in the US military, okay, they are in charge. They have their 150 military bases in 75 countries. The share of global wealth that is being sucked from south to north is the highest it has ever been. The concentration of wealth in the hands of billionaires is higher than it's ever been. And yet we know that their system is crumbling. But we're in an interesting period. It's not crumbling like their system of domination has done in the past, which is because of the rising tide of our organizing and our forces, but because just on its own terms, it actually can't hold together. Now, we see that very clearly in the genocide in Gaza. and Matt made some reference to the fact that and Lindsey did as well, that the populations of the handful of the tiny handful of countries that support Israel's genocide in Gaza, and it's not just Lebanon, in Yemen and Iran, who support what Israel is doing. The vast majority of people, not only in Britain, in the US, think that Israel is committing a genocide, think that they shouldn't, there shouldn't be arms sales. And one of the great things, so my day job, I'm the communications director for the Progressive International, which is a global network of left-wing movements, parties, trade unions, peasant organizations, liberation struggles, campaigns, all the good stuff, basically. And it's sort of mainly in the south, but somewhat in the north. It's global in the real sense of global. And I have the privilege of, therefore, being able to see, bit by bit, different forces thinking, oh, actually, maybe we can do things for ourselves, and maybe we should be looking left and right rather than up to the US. And all of these efforts to create new cartels for minerals, for coffee, for natural resources, to challenge the WTO, and so on and so forth. Small, embryonic, but these things are all starting. And then we look at Britain. So we just had what's in some ways an extremely effective transfer of power within the British establishment, right? The Team A, the political Team A for the oligarchy within the propaganda system, as Matt was laying out, the A team, they really just bogged it, right? They had the Tories, Capital's A team. It was just embarrassing. It got really bad. Everyone hated them. Most people in the country are worse off. So they have to hand over power to somebody else. And fortunately enough, they've got the Labour Party, which is now, unfortunately, historically the Labour Party has had one foot in the establishment in the state and one foot in the forces that seek to challenge it. It's a revolution within the Labour Party that has happened in a very short period of time. It's now an alliance between Treasury orthodoxy and corporate lobbyists. That's it. We aren't, like ordinary people, unless, you happen to be corporate, you're a corporate lobbyist who's slipped in here to steal a bit of education like I did years ago. Like, you don't have a seat at the table, you're not part of it, it's not a political project for you. But the general election, it seems like that was a really good thing. They managed to hand over power to someone else. They'll run the country in, broadly speaking, the same way. It will give the other lot some time to develop some weird, nasty memes about the people that are really ruining the country, which obviously isn't the people that own everything, run everything, and have the guns and the weapons and sell the guns and the weapons. Or it's the protesters, or it's people on benefits, or it's migrants, or refugees, or Muslims, or whatever they've decided the problem is. But they have a really, really big problem that the general election was a huge rejection of the political media class. Just the political media class haven't realised it yet. Right? It's not just that the Tories got less than half the votes that they got in 2019. Labour got more than 500,000 votes fewer than we got in 2019. The electoral high watermark in terms of votes for Starmer's Labour is lower than the electoral nadir of Corbynism, the supposedly extremely unpopular, unelectable, madcap thing that we tried to do. There's a kind of weightlessness to the political system now, because the establishment thinks, and it's great, when you go and talk to them, they still, they really, really think this, because they're not very bright. They think that everything is going to go back to normal because they've managed to hand over power from one party to another. Labour have this huge majority, as if that particularly matters. I mean, the Tories had a huge majority, and it was with Boris Johnson, and the whole thing fell apart, and they couldn't do anything. What laws did they pass? I mean, they made protests more difficult. They did some things like that, but there's no substantial legislative program that they can say that they did. So we are in this weird place, I think, in this great, going back to the main point, this ongoing, never-ending struggle between the forces of democratization and the forces of domination. We are in a point where they still think that they're able to advance domination further, and that we will accept it, or that we haven't noticed, or that we will support it, or that we don't support it and we have noticed, but we think we're in the minority. We're past that point now. We're way past that point, I think. And if you look at the last year and the response in this country and around the world to the imperial slaughter in Gaza, and the hatred and loathing around the world for US imperialism, and the hatred and loathing and disgust that you see in Britain by the majority of people for what Israel is doing in Gaza and beyond, and its role, and more people can see it as this, its role as an imperial outpost. This is not a problem that is going on over there. Again, these are connected. The democratization of the great process of democratization around the world is totally linked to here, and here is linked to there. We cannot have democracy. We will only have oligarchy here if we are part of imperialism abroad. If we accept that pattern of structure, if we accept that we are happy to live in effectively a colonial world, we will never have democracy here, because that same imperialism, those same colonial structures, they don't enrich all of us. They enrich and empower those who run our societies here. So I'll move towards ending, I think, with a few things about what we can maybe do in this moment, and how we can connect. I think very importantly, what is happening around the world with what is happening here, and how that has to be a central part, I think, of a lot of the work that we do. So internationally, there is a huge amount of resistance that is taking place in country after country to the present state of things, that they have to live with. That doesn't mean that every protest movement is politically advanced and coherent and ready to act, but the ingredients are there. In country after country, you're seeing that happen about domestic issues, and that also being connected internationally. And here, I think, and I'll say a few more, and then here the main task is to rebuild the power that we had in our society, we had in our communities, we had in our trade unions, we had in our organizations at the end of the great wave, the last great wave of democratization. There's no magic button that we can press that rebuilds all of that. If we had won the general election, say, in 2017 or 2019, we could have done and would have done some good things for a while, but there was always a limit to how much we would be able to do with the level of organization that we currently have in our society. I think, there's a big difference, and there's the reason why there are so many things. You look around, you look at the polling, and you see supermajority of people support wealth taxes, supermajority of people support public ownership of water, supermajority of people, and big supermajorities we're talking, people support ending arms sales to Israel. Why can't we make those things happen? Because we don't have any power. Those 3/4, 80% of the population, the overwhelming majority, the democratic power in our society, we don't have power. And that doesn't mean we don't have government. That doesn't mean we don't have office. I mean, we don't have power. If we had power, then those things would be happening. So on the relationship to the global, I think we impose imperialism in every single way in which we can, demonstrating, organizing, and so on. who challenge the war machine. Like Britain still plays a very important role in the global war machine. Take the F-35 jets that rain death and destruction and desperation down on Gaza and on Lebanon. The ejector seats, they're made in Britain, and then they're sent to the US. Those licenses are still freely there. The UK government, I think it's 8% of licenses, they said they weren't going to issue. But apparently because F-35 jets could be used by someone other than Israel, they don't want to stop them being sold, because of course these are, it's really important that there are more of these F-35 jets going around. So we can oppose the war machine, we can oppose imperialism, and we can connect the struggles that are here to the struggles in the rest of the world. And for what we can do here, everybody has issues, right? As in, you're at work, you're a student, you're a tenant, you're in debt, whatever it is. We need to rebuild power, which means finding other people who have the same issues that you have and organising so you can build some power. Those things will then add up and will take a political expression, and there will be a party and we can try to win elections and whatever, but it has to be built based on that great wave of democratisation, which happens everywhere. It is not something that's done for us. It's not something that we're a spectator of, that like we have our team and they go on TV and they go in Parliament and then they do the nice stuff and we're happy because we get to cheer them on a Saturday or whatever. It's like, that's not how the great waves of democratisation of the past, the great struggles of democratisation have happened before.
James, can you wrap up?
And it's not going to happen now. So let's do like Rosa Luxemburg and shake our chains and find out exactly where they are and how far we can drag ourselves with them.
I think there's the central points you made, especially around power, are really, really important and things we should reflect on. Perhaps it's worth saying, given that we're at a university, that part of releasing your own power is educating yourself about how the system really works. And being here, of course, is part of that liberation. And once you liberate yourself, it's hard. Once you can see what's happening, for example, in Gaza, it's difficult to go back and think of it any other way. And as you liberate yourself, you liberate others, and you become more able to liberate society. We now have we're at about 8:30. I'm intending to take about 20 to 25 minutes of questions, although I know James probably has to leave partway through that. It's very hard after you've been sitting quietly for an hour and a bit to not be able to give a couple of sentences of context before your question. So please feel free to do so, but if you can avoid giving another speech, that would be really helpful. So I'm going to take questions from the audience, perhaps, if anybody has any burning questions. Yes, Halima? Oh, sorry, you have the mic. Halima's got the mic and is kindly passing it around so that we can capture what you have to say. And yeah, gentleman at the back, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mirza. I'm technical director at a local newspaper in London, and I'm also a PR official for Brussels Morning, a Belgium-based newspaper. My question is for James. When you say it's establishment, the word itself, what do you mean? What you are referring to? Who are the beneficiary? Are there any entity? Who they are actually?
The fundamental basis of the establishment are the owners of the core industries, the most important industries, the most powerful companies within the enforcement of empire, so that's within the war machine. But then you have the next layer down, that's the kind of their fundamental basis, but those are the bits that you tend to see you tend to see less, and they do their work more behind the scenes. And then you have the kind of governing layer, so those would be senior civil servants, the political media class I referred to. So I would say that's the sort of constellation that makes up the establishment. It's it's a slightly loose, baggy term, but none of them can be terribly specific. The ruling class, the people in charge, whatever, but even those are just synonyms. They're not any more precise.
Thank you. Yes, the lady in blue. Thank you.
Hi, I don't know who this is for, but I have a question about trade unionism and democracy. Basically, how does unionism fit into the modern world? Because it feels like trade unions are always playing catch up to technology and never able to get ahead of that, and what that kind of means now and going forward. Thanks.
Can you just elaborate on the question a little bit so that I understand and we understand what you mean by trade unions are playing catch up with technology? You mean in terms of the workforce, or do you mean in terms of the way the political system works?
I was thinking more in terms of Amazon workers and things like that, about how people can't seem to people are reacting to how companies deal with technology, how they introduce technology, rather than being able to get ahead of that, and what that kind of means. How basically do trade unions fit into the modern state of things without becoming relics, basically?
Thanks, that's a great question. I'm going to invite Lindsey and James to come in on that. Lindsey, please.
Yes, I think that the trade unions, if you look at any time when the trade unions have developed, it's been in contrast to the kind of levels of repression from the employers. And what you've got, as you say, with Amazon, you've got an attempt to really try to atomize workers. You've got an attempt, obviously, to make them work in very, very difficult conditions and to try to separate them off. And if you look at modern societies, I mean, it used to be 100 years ago people would walk or cycle to where they worked in a factory. Now, of course, it's much more atomized in terms of where people live and things like that. But it's also the case that there are lots of examples where people are trying to organise in that kind of way. And for example, in the United States at the moment, there's a number of quite important strikes going on. I mean, some in old industries like Boeing, but also in a whole number of new industries, warehouses, because logistics is probably the cutting edge of a lot of places where people are going to unionise. So I think it's definitely possible to do, but the unions can't do it just by being bureaucratised at the top. And I think that's one of the things that is very, they'll throw money at saying, oh yeah, we want to get these people unionised. But actually they approach it in a very, very narrow way and don't want to do anything too difficult. Just one other point, there's some interesting stuff about there was a guy called Nigel Flanagan who's written a little book about how we can rebuild unions. And one of the things he talks about is in various parts of the global south where people have used quite interesting techniques to try to organise quite differently from the way that you've traditionally think about it in Britain. So I think we've got to think about those things as well. But I definitely think the whole process of exploitation can lead and should lead, in theory, to unions growing. Unfortunately, they're still not growing, and even the strike wave didn't really change that. So it's a question of we've got to look at why that is and how we bring in particularly young people to the unions, because they're old as well. They're quite female-dominated, and they're quite, in some industries, quite high levels of ethnic minorities, but they are in general quite old bodies at the moment.
Thanks, Lindsey. Over to you, James.
So the first thing I'd say is that trade unions are just groups of workers coming together to do something. That can't be an outdated, they can do outdated things, and they can have structures within those groups of workers coming together that cannot be the most effective tactics and strategies. But ultimately, a trade union is just a group of workers who've decided to work together to improve their position at work. And that part of the branding and the presentation of trade unions, that a great deal of harm has been done to us, and I think we accept it too much, of viewing trade unions as these organisations which are distinct from distinct from workers, and whereas they're workers' organisations. Then specifically, I just want to speak at Amazon, because one of the things I do with the Progressive International is we organise the Make Amazon Pay campaign. And we've been doing that now for 4 years. And you're right that trade unions, workers, organisers need to do something that is relevant to the form of work as it is and how it relates. So one of the things that we've been trying to do is organise. There's organising in the traditional way, in individual warehouses and so on, and then there's trying to organise along a supply chain, or organise across borders, so that, and this is something that we've been seeing over the last 4 years with Amazon, the efforts to organise workers in one place gives confidence to workers to try to organise in another place. Because really, and you can see this, like when people spend money, especially when rich people spend money, you should look at that and learn from what they're doing. So Amazon spend an absolute fortune against unionisation. They spend an absolute fortune scaring workers and trying to undermine workers' self-confidence, both individually and collectively. So one of the main strategic things that we can do, especially in a global company where there are so many points of entry because it is so big, like Amazon, is do things which build up workers' confidence to combat the fact that when they do go into a unionisation drive and they want to gain recognition and start negotiating and bargaining, they're going to be hit with a barrage of one-to-one meetings where you get told unions are only after your dues and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks, James. If I may, there is one other, I guess, a few points I wanted to make, which is that I think a lot, Amazon apart, I don't think it's just technology that is leaving trade unions behind. It is a very ossified and calcified structure at the top of trade unions and within the trade union bureaucracy and within its democratic structures, really, where there is, over time, the trade unions have found it easier to take people's subs and not do things that people want. And that is a problem of democratic ownership of the union. You can either see the union as a service union where you pay your dues, and if something goes wrong, you can use it as an insurance and they'll fight for you. Or you can see it as a member-led union where the members decide how things are done. And if you are, despite best intentions, it's very difficult for bureaucracies of trade unions, not just like bureaucracies of NGOs, tend to want their own survival rather than necessarily, address the issues. Trade unions are in the same boat, and sometimes there is a fear of failure, sometimes there is a fear of retribution, and sometimes there is simply immense pressure within the union, from the top of the union, to silence dissent and silence protest. And we should do within trade unions what we are doing within society, which is to rebuild democracy and allow people who are experiencing the issues to come to the fore. And that's partly that comes from each of us as a trade unionist taking ownership of our union and not being pushed away by those who think they know better. So I think there's a lot to be said about that. Are there any further questions? Great. 2 more questions, and then I have one for Matt. But the lady there, and then the gentleman here.
Thank you. Hi, Lindsey. You spoke about the importance of demonstrating and protesting. You're probably aware SOAS held an encampment outside, and there were more than one incidents where the security here were either aggressive themselves or didn't really step in to protect the students when outside agitation came in. We had Zionist attacks on the students. A Buddhist monk, was dragged and injured and accused of stealing a laptop. He doesn't even carry anything. He's a Buddhist monk. He's literally like in his Buddhist garms, and you can see he's not carrying anything. Police came in and really violently arrested him. Another guy, known as Mr. Bean, he was held to the ground and he couldn't breathe, and he kept telling the police officers, I can't breathe. I met him later and I asked him if that was just him sort of symbolically saying it. He said, no, I genuinely couldn't breathe. None of the university security stepped in. We talked about speaking truth to the, to power. What would the panel say about SOAS and the lack of protection that it gave to the students during the summer this year and the way they were evicted? Thank you.
Would you mind if I take the second question, just because if James wants to add a point or two before he leaves, he can. Thank you.
So my question is not directed to one person, so it's open for panel. I'm originally from Afghanistan, came as a refugee student, so I had two questions. So from my perspective, looking at through the lenses of history of Afghanistan, the root cause of problem goes into capitalism. Whether if it's British Empire to control India as its colony, fighting Afghanistan and undermining Afghanistan's international trade and relationship, to Russian imperialism, different model of capitalism, and then another model of capitalism, the Chinese model, and the US imperialism. So that's, from my perspective, that's the capitalism as the root cause, and there's to every mean that there is to control is through media, controlling people through media, and also the rise of Islamophobia. So my question is, what is next for capitalism and the neoliberalism, and how can someone make people aware of Islamophobia? How can we fight back against Islamophobia? Thank you.
Okay, so we have 3 questions in total. We'll take a response to the first one, and then we'll come back to capitalism as well as neoliberalism and Islamophobia. Gentlemen here, you had a question as well. I'll come back to you in a second. Let's take these 2. Thank you.
Just on the first question. Yeah, okay. No, I very much agree with you about the SOAS encampment. It was a very, very important thing. The students managed to sustain it very, very well. And the authorities here have been very brutal in their treatment of it. And, when you look at security guards, the truth is they are employed in order to stop people from doing things. They're not there to help people, and so they're another method of policing, really. That's what they're doing, and they obviously had no intention of helping the students or protecting them in any kind of way. So I think the students here and the staff and UCU should protest about these people. We should actually go to the authorities and say this is unacceptable. They're taking huge amounts of money from students for their education, which is supposed to be including the right to protest, the right to be able to develop your ideas over all these sorts of things, and it's absolutely appalling. And now, of course, the new government's going to put up tuition fees as well. So, all of this is a big attack on students, and I very much support the students in anything that they do over this.
Could I just add to that? And I am not going to respond specifically to the SOAS encampment because I think Lindsey's done that. But just across the higher education sector and in further education, actually, what has been really quite powerful is the way in which students have mobilized at the encampments and how there has been a lot of learning and discussion. One of the things I was talking to somebody earlier about this, and one of the challenges we have, especially with people who are radicalized and mobilized, is we haven't yet learned how to have dialogue. Because we have this mobilization, we have this anger, but then we need to do something with that rather than just constantly protest. Because one of the bugbears I have with the left is you see a big problem, you write a letter to the Camden New Journal or to the Guardian or wherever it is, get 5,000 signatures, let somebody harvest your data online, essentially. And that's about it. And then you move to the next thing you want to criticize. But part of what we have to do is, I mean, I think different people are doing it differently, and of course there are people who are taking action. But part of what we need to do is reflect on how we then take that energy from the encampments and from our movements to have dialogue and press for change. And for that, we can't just talk to people who are on our side. We have, I mean, now, as you know, as far as Gaza is concerned, we're in the majority. But what we're finding difficulty with is getting the people at the top to listen to what we're saying. But in general, we tend to put ourselves in boxes of left or right, and then the conversation doesn't happen. And I think that conversation is something we have to build, especially at universities across this country. The second question was about neoliberalism, capitalism, but also about Islamophobia, and I wondered whether, I think Matt's written extensively on this, so may have want to comment.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with, I agree with you. I mean, for me, the main problem is imperialism. But then Lenin said that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, so obviously they're related. But if you look at the world today, you're allowed to lament the state of the world in the mainstream media, but what you're not allowed to say is that it's not an accident, it's not a coincidence. The world we see is the system running as it should. The vast discrepancies in wealth, the wars, that is how the system works. You know, Afghanistan is the tragic state it's in, is the result of the centuries of exploitation by imperial powers. You see it everywhere. Look at Latin America. Bolivia currently has a government which represents its people, but for 500 years after the Spanish came, all the resources got taken out of that country, and this happened in the whole of Latin America, and were taken to Europe to build up imperial capitals in Europe. So the imperialism is our biggest enemy. And to be specific about it, it's the US empire, because that's the most powerful empire right now, and that's the one that has the most powerful military to back it up. You know, Gaza is a good example. How did the Palestinian tragedy happen? That was an imperial project. That was a British imperial project, 1917 Balfour Declaration. And they weren't doing it because they cared about the welfare of Jewish people. They did it because they wanted what they called a little Jewish Ulster in the Middle East to keep that region backward, to keep the oil flowing, and to keep the people under control. And what we're seeing now is a result of that. Why are the British and the Americans still supporting it? Because they're doing their job to beat up the region for it. So we need to go back to what James was saying about the global fight. Like, we're fighting the global fight is a fight against empire, and it's the American empire, and you can't talk about that in the mainstream media. Why? Why have you got this massive empire that controls the whole world, that makes it so you can't have any independent governments, or they try to overthrow independent governments that are actually using the resources of their country for their people? Yet you can't mention it. You can talk about Russian imperialism or Chinese imperialism, but you can't talk about American imperialism. So we need to smash that kind of block that is imposed on us. And I think it's happening. I'll finish with this. Like, Gaza has revealed that like never before, you know. The American empire has always been brutal and savage, like the British Empire was. You know, look what they did in Vietnam. 2 million people dead, a whole country destroyed. They dropped there was lots of innovation in chemical production in America at the time, and they just used Vietnam as a test case to drop it all over the people there. You know, I've been there, and you see some of the pictures of what happened after they dropped all this different stuff. It's disgusting. Then they bombed Cambodia, Laos. They killed 500,000 people in Cambodia. You know, but that was all kind of done in secret. Or the war in Cambodia was secret, and Laos. But Gaza, we're all seeing it on our phones, and we're all seeing Joe Biden, who's a Democrat, we're told is the good guy, coming up and defend it all. So the system is revealed. We know these people do not give a shit about human life. They don't give a shit about anyone who gets in their way. They'll take them out. And many, many people are realizing this now, because Gaza is opening people's minds, but they're not just understanding that they've been lied to about Israel. They're thinking, well, If I've been lied to about Israel, I've probably been lied to about everything, and yes, you have. Have you been lied to about America being a benevolent or a benign power? No, it's not. It's a brutal empire. So I'm quite hopeful in that sense. We need to crystallize that feeling and crystallize that awakening and use it to understand who our real enemies are. And they're the enemies that we're not allowed to mention in the mainstream, but we need to keep bringing that up. And I'll just finish with this. It relates to British democracy. You can't have a democracy if you have 12,000 foreign troops occupying your country, which we have here. You can't have a democracy if the US National Security Agency runs 2 of your main intelligence stations. You can't have a democracy if your political parties are run through different front groups by the Americans. You can't. So we don't. That's another obstacle to democracy in this country, that we're the 51st state. And again, you can't talk about it. So our enemies are clear. We need to be clear-eyed about who they are. And once we got some way to go on that, I think there's some there's an inability to talk about this in really clear-eyed terms. But hopefully that will change. And once we do, we can fight for democracy and also fight against war and imperialism.
Lindsey.
Just to add to what Matt said, I think there's also, you raised the question of Islamophobia, and of course when you are waging war against largely Muslim countries, as Britain and the United States has done in Afghanistan, obviously your own country, and in Iraq and Libya and involvement in Yemen and Syria, you go through the whole list of it, you have to demonise the people who you're attacking. You have to say that they're somehow less than human, or they're not as civilised as people in Britain or America. And this is definitely one of the ideologies that is very central to, I think, to the whole of Western capitalism at the moment, and that is Islamophobia. It's not just the main form of racism, it is the state-backed form of racism. It's not just like people don't like Muslims, they're encouraged by the government, by the media, by all these people to think in those terms. So I think we have to fight that very hard, and I think we do have to link it to the wider questions of imperialism. America's a declining imperialism, but it's still massive. And Britain started losing its empire around 100 years ago, a bit more than 100 years ago, with Ireland first of all. And if you look, it takes a long, long time for these countries to decline, and actually they still have the weaponry, they still have all those things. Look at Diego Garcia today, the announcement about the Chagos Islanders, which is good up to a point, but we're leasing the base for the Americans and Britain for another 99 years. So, this isn't democracy, this isn't the end of imperialism, so I think we've got to fight for that. Can I just plug, I've got some leaflets here for the demonstration on Saturday and some posters, so please take them, because we will be raising the question of Islamophobia on that demonstration as well.
Can I add something on Islamophobia?
Of course you can. And then I will take your question, and that'll probably be the last question unless somebody's got a burning question.
Sorry, I didn't mention that in my answer, but I should have. Part of it is what Lindsay's saying. It's about who we've been at war with and the need to demonise them. But I think another part of it is it's integral to capitalism that, especially a capitalism in crisis, which it is, the gap between the rich and the poor is getting wider. People are struggling, and like they haven't for many, many decades in this country. In that scenario, you need to have some safety valve to push the population towards, to push that anger away from the oligarchy, who are the real criminals and the real people who are causing that inequality and causing life to suck for so many people. And they don't want people that, if you read the Daily Mail, there's not front pages about the companies that don't pay tax. There's not front pages about Tory politicians that are taking corporate money. What the front pages are about migrants or about Muslims. And that's been a tenet of capitalism ever since capitalism exists. It's divide and rule. So you don't look up, you look to the side. So I think Islamophobia now, it used to be the Jews. For a long time, the Jews were the bully boys that they used, and the Nazis used that while they channeled all that anger towards, and in many ways, Muslims now are the new Jews in that sense, because you can say whatever you want about Muslims in this society now. Whatever you want, on the front page of newspapers. There was a Katie Hopkins It's migrants as well, not just Muslims, but obviously there's links between the two. But Katie Hopkins, who's disgusting, but did have a column on in The Sun, which is the biggest selling newspaper in the country. She wrote a column which got through the editors, basically saying, talking about when that little kid was found on the beach, and she was like, I want to see more dead people, I want to see more dead kids, like I want them to send gunboats out. And that's Nazi language she was using to call them vermin. Now that's very, very scary when you can have that being published in the biggest selling newspaper in the country. And I still think we're in that we're in that environment still, and it's merely because they don't want us to look up at the oligarchy. And I think that that's the media's role, and we can't really change the media. As I mentioned when I was talking, is we need to just build our own media, but also beat the. Maybe I can't say that, I'll get arrested. But push the Tommy Robinsons and those people off the streets, because they only understand force. And you can talk about theory all day, but they're here now, and they are terrorizing communities, and we can't have that in this country.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take one final question from you. Okay, I'll take both the questions, and if you can give really succinct answers, that'd be great, because I know people are tired and probably want to get home.
This for Matt, it's about digital media. I went home to my parents recently and realised how much social media they're consuming, and a lot of it's influencing their own perspectives on national politics. Very right-wing kind of perspectives of what's happening in England. You haven't really addressed digital media, social media in this talk. Over the summer, obviously, there were riots, which basically were sparked from, I think, social media posts. And yeah, I was wondering, when I was thinking about the state of democracy, I was thinking kind of like, that's a big problem at the moment. Obviously, there's some great activism happening through digital media, but at the same time, I see some very big problems with it. And I'm wondering, does that come from the top, or does that come from democracy itself? How would you explain that?
It's difficult.
Matt, before you start, could I take the other question?
Yeah, so just adding on that point only, because earlier when there was legacy media, traditional media, sure, thank you. People or media organization had a kind of excuse saying that, okay, some people are over there making the decision what should be published or what should be broadcast. But now in the age of digital media, there are number counts. So publication can very easily say that this is what people want to read or see. It's not our fault. So like, in that case, what, like as you said, alternative media or a journalist who want to make an impact or, do a stories which are not being taken, like the case of Julian Assange, what should they do?
Thank you. Can I just say that Matt probably has quite an in-depth answer to both questions. He will give I hope he will give a few points, but if Matt has the time, perhaps we can all socialize later once the event is formally closed. So please feel free to stay back if you have any burning questions that have not been answered.
Sure. So on the first one, social media is a complicated one because the mainstream doesn't include the far left or the far right. Well, I talked about Katie Hopkins, she's on the far right, but there's parts of our political system that are disenfranchised by the mainstream, including us on the panel, but that also goes for the right. So when you have a social media that can circumvent the mainstream, that obviously gives a right to us, but it also gives a right to those other sections as well. So it depends what your perspective on free speech is, because it's one I can't really get my head around, because look, Tommy Robinson's a good example, right? Like, I don't like, obviously if someone's inciting violence, they should, that's a criminal offence. You can't do that. But if you're not, should you be banned from social media? But then the other side of that is, look what happened when they did ban Tommy Robinson from Twitter. He disappeared, which was a great thing. So I don't know. It's one we're going to have to deal with. And obviously the other point is, if you support tools to be used, repressive tools to be used against the right, they will be used against you eventually as well. So it's one that it has to take some thought. It's not, there's no easy answer to that. But then, of course, it's the same with Donald Trump, right? Was it right for Twitter to take him off after he incited the January 6th riots? Some people might say it was. Other people say it wasn't. Mexico's left-wing president, AMLO, was very much against taking Trump off Twitter after that. So it's not really a left-right issue in that sense. But I mean, I think personally for democracy, social media has changed everything. I mean, look at Gaza as well, not to bang on about it, but the reason we have such a wide understanding of what Israel is doing there is because of social media. The media aren't telling us, or they're not telling us as the full story, but people are seeing it on Instagram, they're seeing it on Twitter. So it's a wonderful way, and at Declassified, we wouldn't exist without social media. We never get covered by the mainstream, ever. So if we didn't have social media to push our content out and to reach people, we wouldn't exist. So it's a very, very good tool. But obviously, the problem is they're owned by massive corporations and oligarchs. So it's quite a scary thing if your whole existence professionally relies on these oligarchs, because they can, at the flick of a button, completely silence you. It's not state repression, but it's corporate repression.
Matt, can I get you to wrap up? Because there are a few people working
Sure.
who will
Yeah,
probably need to go. Did you have a chance to quickly address that bit of the question? Would you like to, has your question been answered to some extent? Because you were just asking, what should people do? Isn't that right?
What would people do for...
What would journalists do if they wish to offer alternative views? What are the ways to break
we have
through?
tools now. You can get the information out. My advice, I do get asked by journalism students sometimes, like, what should I do? Because I don't want to work in the mainstream. And I'm like, don't do it. If you don't, like, obviously you have to make a living, but there's ways of doing it now where you don't have to work in the mainstream, because the mainstream, you can't, you can stay in a couple of years and learn how to be a journalist or whatever, but you can't, as a career, you can't do good journalism anymore in the mainstream. And it wasn't always like that. Like, The Guardian used to have good journalists who were actually doing critical stuff. Like Richard Norton-Taylor, who's part of ours, he's a brilliant journalist. He was the security editor at The Guardian for 30 or 40 years. But John Pilger used to write for The Guardian and the Mirror, yeah, front page. Paul Foot, yep. These kind of people, if they were starting out now, they'd have no chance in the mainstream. So, which is a funny contradiction in itself, because you would have thought the democratization of the media, social media, the pressure it would put on the mainstream, they'd have to open up. But the opposite dynamic has happened. They've closed any avenues for more maverick or left reporters, which and made themselves more redundant. But I think because of that, people don't really read. I don't consume them. Mainstream media barely at all. I get all my news from Twitter. So it's a hopeful time for people who want to work outside the mainstream, and I think we have to.
Thank you. And I'm going to pass back to Alison, who I can see is waiting patiently to wrap up.
Thank you very much. Brilliant, fantastic panel. Thank you so much. And Deepa, thank you for chairing. Thank you so much, Matt, Lindsey, and in his absence, James. You've been a fantastic audience. Just before you go, if you want to talk to people about the stuff we do in Parliament, we are speaking truth to power. It's quite true when you give the weight of all the negativity that we are existing under, that we had a lot of doubts when we started this work. We thought, well, we had a doubt that anything we could do as individuals would make a difference. We had a doubt that if we entered Parliament, we'd become contaminated by negative power. But you can also use doubt as a catalyst. You can say, well, I'll try. Just why not try? So if you could wave your hands, there are some people in the group, some people here who are on the group. Nina, you know, obviously, because she's had the flowers. But if you could just wave your hands if you're, and is Sanjana here as well? And Hassan, if you want to talk to anybody at the end, there are some people in the audience who are conducting this work with us. And believe me, the MPs need the knowledge that you hold, because they are generalists. They cannot know, they cannot master a brief unless you tell them the facts. And that's what is worth trying to do. So thank you for a brilliant evening, fantastic panel. Thank you.
And thank you, Alison, Nina, the gentleman at the back doing the filming, Sanjana and colleagues for being here. Thank you.